What's up, Igor? What's up, MJ? Oh, not much. Just got done doing speed bench last night and coming in early to walk on the treadmill for 35, 45 minutes before I train the fire departments today. I'm not talking about anything in particular today, just kind of going live and just keeps me busy while I'm walking. You know, I think like a lot of lifters, I'm not really a huge fan of doing a lot of cardio, so if I go live, it kind of makes the time go a lot faster, keeps my mind off of just walking. I got a new video I'm going to drop today. It's some finer details on hypertrophy and some things that you should focus on if you're trying to build more muscle. That I think will be pretty interesting. A lot of this stuff is in the book, so I kind of went back and dug into my research and a lot of the reading that I did for the book that's coming out hopefully this year. I know we're at chapter. I think they're doing the final editing on chapter 5 and 6 right now. Said you a mess about connective tissue adaptations. Can you maybe talk about connective tissue? Yeah. If you look at loading parameters for developing passive tissue, it really likes to respond to moderate loads with higher volumes. And some of the research you see, which is not a ton, but some of the research you see is, i.e. over 20 reps. So when I first saw this around 2012, 2013, it was kind of a light bulb moment that I wasn't doing a lot of work in those rep ranges. And if I wanted to stay healthy in my 30s while trying to break records, then those tissues were going to have some serious mindset in my workout. So if you look at real strength, most people focus on muscle and active tissue that's contractile, but in reality, a fairly large portion of your strength is stored with kinetic energy in the tendon and fascia. I would even say upwards of somewhere between 35%, almost of a coil-like action. And to utilize it correctly means that tissue needs to be very, very healthy and also accommodative to those loading parameters. So if you look at, say, how long it takes for a nerve, a bone, and a muscle to adapt to training, you're looking at a matter of 1 to 2, 3 mesocycles. It doesn't necessarily mean it's fully done growing. It just means that it kind of gets its activation much faster. If we look at ligaments, tendons, and cartilage, on average take about 6 to 10 times longer to develop to the training. And this is why it's really important. Again, with the book I'm reading right now that I think I either posted yesterday or the day before on Patreon, had a very large portion of that book was dedicated to deloading to ensure that these passive tissues were being addressed and training was slowed down enough to actually let these things regenerate and adapt to training. So in reality, deloads and lower parts of training stimuli are more for passive tissue than it is muscle. I think that maybe in general, if you're training super smart, muscles can regenerate themselves in roughly, if the volume, intensity, duration is optimal, 72 hours is about the time you need, which is what we do with the workouts, if you're following what I'm doing. But the ligaments, tendons, and cartilage take quite a bit longer. And so every month or so, some of your training has to come down in order for those things to catch up, because those particular portions of the body are fed lymphatically and not through the blood supply. So unlike muscle, which has, blood vessels running to it, has the ability to circulate, ligaments, tendons, and cartilage don't have the same feeding system. So with that being said, they adapt to training slower and more methodically. I've posted charts on that before, but the point is that I started to realize in my own training that I really didn't have any, by that time I was 32, maybe 33. I started to realize that none of my training was really dedicated towards ligament and tendon density. And also, as I got stronger and stronger and stronger, my physical fitness, or GPP, was starting to have a hard time catching up to my strength level. So as I got to world record level squats, my 600 plus bench was very hard to maintain, because after the squat, I was just fucking wrenched. It was just full body energy. So I needed a way to not only focus on passive tissue having more resiliency and keeping me away from injuries, which I was able to do. My work capacity also was my limiting factor. So it seemed to fit, two birds with one stone. So as I did it, I started to utilize it in a very slow manner. Like when I first started fucking around with Wenning warm-ups, I was using 30-pound dumbbells for 4 sets of 25 on the bench. And, I was a 600, I'd already benched 600 pounds raw. So I find it interesting that you got guys that bench 250, 275, and they're trying to use 40 and 50-pound dumbbells and then saying that the Wenning warm-ups don't work. Well, obviously your RPE or percentage is way too high. So the point is that I think that you don't hear anybody on the internet talking about passive tissues. And the more I dug into my research for my book, I started to realize that that was a massive portion of training, and one that the Russians had been talking about for 50 years. It's just something I never really put two and two together. And then as I saw guys like Vasily Alexiev, which was one major component to the Wenning warm-ups and passive tissue, would warm up with like a 50 or 60 pound kettlebell for 15 minutes before he even touched a barbell. And I was thinking, man, at 370 or 80 pounds or whatever he was, to do kettlebell work for 15 minutes straight, like obviously different exercises, but what was his work capacity like, And that's when you start realizing that sometimes work capacity is not necessarily how you look. And I think that's another major issue that we find in the fitness industry, is people base so much of performance on aesthetics, when in reality, they're very separate. Not to say that having lower body fat is not crucial for athletic performance. I think it helps. But, you see a lot of the most powerful men that we've ever seen, like Shane Hammond, for example, not really lean. You look at guys like Mark Henry, not really lean. You look at guys that's won World's Strongest Man. They have a lot of muscle, but they're not super lean. Growth hormone increases with high volume training, but the problem is growth hormone also increases with high intensity training as well. The thing of it is volume is a key component to any kind of hormonal response for sure. How the camber bar used for bench varies in application to the buffalo bar. It's quite a bit steeper of an angle, because in the buffalo bar, it's a constant bend throughout the entire bar. So you do have a little bit of depth increase, but with the camber bar wanting to come around your body almost 4 or 5 inches, it's at least double the amount of projected range of motion that can be possible. So for on the camber bar, for me, it's impossible to touch. I've worked my way up to 500 on that, and I can only get this fucking close because everything is just so ready to just bench with a straight bar, which means I have to be really careful with it, because if it's just this much more of a stretch than a normal bar than my body's used to, obviously pec and shoulder problems can be present. So I find that most people that can touch with that bar tend to not have a good bench press. or they're not maxing their bench press, because in some ways, being really good at the bench is about a little bit about stiffness. I remember 2005, maybe 2004 or 5, I remember Scott Mendelson having the world record raw bench at like 722, maybe 715. And I watched him warm up, and that dude could not, with a straight bar, could not touch 500. It took like 585 for it to start touching. And it started making me wonder, like, how much of these guys super strong is more about stretch reflex and ligament and tendon and fascia kinetic energy than it is about pure muscle mass. So not to say that it's not important to be flexible, but there's a limit. And I think that the most impressive thing I've ever seen is the ability for Bill Kazmaier to bench 661 and then squat close to 900 with a regular fucking, Texas power bar length, meaning he had to get into a bar and be so tight and have that much stiffness to be able to bench 661. It's just crazy. And now we have the advent of the squat bar, which is what I always did all my big numbers on, which is nearly a foot wider, which makes it easier to crawl under and get set up. So, I think that changed around the late 80s, maybe 90s. But the Buffalo bar and the camber bar definitely have a different feel. The camber bar feels like extreme range of motion, and the Buffalo bar has a little bit more wobble to it. For why, I'd have to break down the physics on that. I don't really know, but they're different difficulties for different reasons. The Buffalo bar, you're not going to have any problems touching. But the camber bench bar, if you have any kind of a bench press, usually you're not going to be able to touch. I know Rob can't touch. He's bench pressed 585. I bench press 611. I can't touch. It'd be interesting to see if Maddox could touch. I doubt it. But the problem with that camber bar is, people say, well, are you using the bench bar, the camber bar, to its full capacity if you're not touching? Well, think about benching, and when you touch the bar, you know what position you're in and you know where you're at with your lats. When something's floating, it's almost like doing a spoto press. So to me, the camber bar is a bitch. Usually upwards of around 100 pounds weaker than a normal bar. So this week will be the final week that we use the camber bar on the bench for quite a while, and we're changing resistance gradient. So you'll notice week 1 we use regular weights, week 2 we use chains, and this week we'll use something else. Yeah, Rob is an interesting story for sure. It'd be interesting. I'll put Rob, maybe we'll do a podcast with Rob. Rob came to me, 15 years ago, and he had just pretty much gotten out of testicular cancer and was completely out of shape. I mean, just completely terrible. He was a Division I football player for a short period of time. So he had some genetic potential, but after radiation, chemo, removing one testicle, high estrogens, poor diet, it was a struggle. So for the first 2 years, I only had him lift twice a week. And at the end of the second year, Rob decides that he wants to do a powerlifting meet. And I said, okay, we'll train you for a powerlifting meet, but I want to maintain your training at just twice a week so you can recover, because he always had a hard time being able to adapt to the training. And I think a lot of that had to do with the chemo. And so we went through about a 20-week cycle to get him ready. He deadlifts 700 and benches 500 at his first meet. I mean, totally crazy, and that really blew my mind, because I would have thought, 20 years ago, there was no way to get to those numbers and only train twice a week. It really made me rethink a lot of my ideals, which is why we have 3 times a week on Patreon for people that are really busy. We have 2 times a week for people that are over 50, and also 2 times a week resistance training with 3 times a week cardio for weight loss, because in reality, unless you're trying to be the strongest motherfucker you can be, I'm not necessarily sure that you need to train 4 or 5, 6 days a week. I think that the quality of your movement and making sure that you're fixing your weaknesses and then trying to adjust your training based on what you can heal is ultra important to making it better. So on the book, they've sent me back in full edit, done, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. They are reviewing and doing editing on 5 and 6 right now. And then I have set, depending on when the final edit it comes down, because when I turned that book in for school, it was passable for that. But like to put it out as a college level textbook, they had to have more checks and balances on like references and not necessarily references because they did that, but like pictures for copyrights and wording and increasing or decreasing the amount of paragraph size. You know, just a little bit. Human kinetics is really picky. And it's why I try to tell people, like, if you guys have a book and it's published by Human Kinetics or they're asking to publish your book, it's probably a pretty big deal because they're one of the biggest publishers in the exercise science community. That's why it's difficult, because I think some books do slip through the cracks and they have to get self-published or go through a different publishing company. But in my opinion, getting a book done by Kinetics is kind of a milestone, and one in which, you know, was an attempt to get to my professional doctorate. So if you look up the definition of a professional doctorate, you'll kind of see that all the stuff that I explained in the past fit the bill for that. But the big problem is that I need to do it with a university that's recognized more in the United States. They do have some bad blood. The good thing about EIU is I addressed them to this problem, and I did get some sort of a refund on what I had to spend, which was pretty considerable. So that made the blow a little bit better, you know, and unfortunately, you know, that got taken out of context, because if you look at a professional doctorate, they take into account your professional body of work as a whole. So like I had to have so many international and national speaking engagements. I had to have previous master's degree. I had to have outstanding accomplishments, which were weightlifting records and training multiple pro teams, etc. So yeah, it's difficult. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with the doctorate. A PhD really doesn't fit my job description, because as a coach, it's very difficult to decide if I want to go another 60, 80 grand into debt for something that probably is not going to increase my pay one niche. I'm already at the top of my field, but I'm kicking around the idea because I have a little bit more free time than I had in the past with just different things. So it's possible to do, but you know, it's like anything else. People will always find something to bitch and complain about, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's just, yeah, it is what it is. So how many chapters are there in total? Well, pre-edit, depending on if they merge chapters, I think I had 11 chapters, and then I had example workouts on my thought process, designing workouts for like MMA, which I've done in the past, some NFL, which I've done in the past, special operations, general firefighters, things like that, so that people could see kind of my mindset with utilizing these tools in different areas. And obviously they weren't full workouts, they're kind of example blips. He's back to 4 days a week. He was training 2 days a week for the last couple of years because of his job. Let's say because he can't swim. Yeah, there's always going to be haters, that's for sure. It just sucks that the average population, you know, is just, you know, everybody just wants drama, and I don't do that. You know, I'm too busy fucking building my business, making money to sit there and worry about how other people feel about shit. You know what I mean? It's just, it's crazy. It's like now that we don't have Jerry Springer and we don't have Sally Jesse Raphael and all these fucking talk shows, nobody can get on there and talk shit about anybody. But in my opinion, it's like you kind of have to look at somebody's full body of work and see what they're actually doing. Are they doing anything positive in the field? You know, and it's why I don't do a lot of videos of busting people's balls, because in reality, what do people learn from that? It's kind of like when I attacked, if you want to call it that, when I attacked Mike Israetel about him being wrong for using one of my videos for speed work and saying that fast eccentrics don't work, I came back with a lot of educated papers and showed my position on how fast eccentrics actually attack type 2X fibers and how you need a full spectrum of loading in order, even if your goal is hypertrophy, you still don't want to neglect certain contractile types. That to me is a professional way to argue. What recovery techniques did you implement as you got into your 30s? Honestly, just mini workouts. So if you go on the website, there's mini workout manual. That'll show you a lot of stuff that I did on off days or 6 hours pre or post main workout just to restore. But in reality, for most people, it's not about what techniques that I use to recover. It's about implementing a solid sleep progress or solid sleep regimen. You know, I was always in bed really early. I always got at least 9 hours at minimum, most of the time between 10 and 11. I took naps, which I did in my 20s and my 30s. The biggest thing I would say changing from 20s to 30s is in my 20s, I was trying to gain weight. And in my 30s, I was trying to make sure that weight was as healthy and as lean as possible. Because hard to believe, but I was a hard gainer. When I graduated high school at 250, it took me 3.5 years to weigh 280. And it took me another 3 or 4 years to weigh 300. So tips for patience, or for tips for being patient with clients who don't want to listen. Dude, I've been there a million times. And to be honest with you, some people are just not going to fit your way of coaching, and you have to be, you have to just kind of be a little bit more choosy with who you do. You know, like when Bromley used that video of that kid that was squatting, and what I was attempting to do was show somebody with really bad form and how the cues can get mixed up in your training, and then how you fix it without really squatting by doing more glute work, hamstring work, ab work, and then 6 months down the road do another follow-up video. So you have to look at things in context, but with people, you got to understand it. And sometimes people being impatient, it's not their fault. I mean, think about all these fuckheads that sell these 4 and 5 and 6 week programs and 30-day cut challenges and, you know, get your bench strong in 4 weeks type shit. Everybody thinks that living unhealthy for 10 years is fixable in 5 weeks, and it's not. And to sell someone on being technically proficient, I have 2 people in the gym right now that have been there for 2.5 years, and their strength is going up big time. But it took a year to get their technique down because their base athleticism wasn't super high. So their coaching was different. It was harder for them to understand what we were talking about, and it took more time to reprogram the body. So in some ways, some of those clients that are impatient, you're just not going to want. You know what I mean? They're never going to reach that level of aptitude that's going to make it beneficial for you or them. And sometimes people just have an unrealistic view of what's capable. But it's, again, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 5. Yep, 90% are those clients sometimes. Yep, I know. Does Patreon have a way to keep track of the workouts? I'm currently on Train Heroic. No, that's the one big thing. We write them on the board, and you can go way back and see the flow of it, but it doesn't have Train Heroic's ability to calculate everything and put it in, like, you know, reps and sets. And that's the one big thing that I don't like about Patreon that I do love about Train Heroic, is the fact that it calculates everything. But I've been doing workouts like that for 15 years. So I was asked on another video of yours about sports psychology. Yeah, Well, what I've read in the Soviet texts is about biorhythms and how you have educational, emotional, and performance-based waves in like a 35-day cycle, and how each of those cycles, if properly implemented, can be utilized to make the highest level of progress. But it's breaking my balls. How did I find those monsters? I don't know what you're asking, Igor. Louis, dude, the people that came to Louis, the special thing about it is the guys like me and Greg and Chuck and all those dudes, we came to get stronger and listen and put the fucking work in, and not like, we didn't do everything perfect at Westside Barbell, obviously. I mean, I got 200 pounds stronger in a year after leaving, but in the exact same equipment. But there was a certain amount of work ethic that was expected, and a lot of the driving force on that was Chuck and George Halbert. Car content, yeah, I'm about to do some more car content. It's actually way funner for me, that's for sure. That's my brother Daniel. He's cool as shit. So yeah, Louis found those monsters. The monsters found Louis. You know, he wrote out of Powerlifting USA, and it kind of goes back to before social media. You know, Louis would write articles in Powerlifting USA, and people would either local or move away to come and train. I mean, I first heard of Louis Simmons and Powerlifting USA from him writing articles, and I'm like, what the fuck is this dude talking about? I don't know. So it intrigued me. But you find now a lot of people, when you post something that they don't understand or they don't know, they get defiant about it versus intrigued. Like if you start telling somebody that's never seen chains before, you know, they're gonna be like, why don't you just put more weight on the bar? Because they don't understand physics. And it's hard not to get frustrated with it, you know. How to build lower quad muscles. Backward slip pulling, I ruptured my quad tendon off my kneecap. Build the area. How did you, BJK, how did you tear that quad tendon? And building lower quad muscles, in reality, just in my opinion, should be a secondary mindset in your training, because if you're focused solely on your your anterior knee development, a lot of times it creates a posterior weakness. Oh, you fell, not from lifting. Yeah, that's a bitch. Well, the first thing is starting back easy. You know, don't push the range of motion too far, too fast, which is, again, against everything on social media now. You know, slowly build back in range of motion and start to learn how to use, this might be a good time to start learning how to use your hamstrings and hips to be able to do stuff that your knee might be trying to take over genetically anyway. Masters in biomechanics, what can you do with it? It's like any other degree, you know, which I get, and I understand that my professional doctorate coming from a school that's not recognized in America was a fucking hot topic for about a week. Degrees are they're really just stepping stones. In reality, those degrees allowed me to sit in front of fire chiefs and Army generals and people that had higher degrees in themselves and feel like we were on a level playing field, which allowed me to ask or bid for higher contract money. I'll give you an example. When I was working at 4th Infantry at Fort Carson, Colorado in 2011, in 15 weeks, days off included, I was making $5,000 a day because I had a master's degree and had my own business. So I was charging the Army a shitload of money to come out there and work with 4th Infantry. My friend worked with 3rd Infantry on the same base, and we became tighter, obviously, as we worked together, as far as we would see each other at lunches or weekends or whatever, because I lived out there for 15 weeks. He was making about a month what I was making in a day, because I owned my own business and I had a high enough degree to go talk to the generals myself. He had to get the job through a third-party vendor that took the majority of the money for the contract and then paid him to do the work. So the degrees tend to put you at a different table when it's time to get fed. They don't always, though. That's the problem, is like a lot of times, you know, depending on, especially I think in your undergrad and masters, it really depends on who's teaching. There are different amounts of, I'm trying to use the right word. There's different amounts of worth with degrees depending on who your professors are. You know, if you're already, again, it's kind of like in my instance, I was already at the top of my field. So now finding out an honorary professional doctorate in exercise science kinesiology just improved my resume to help with increasing rates at my contracts. And I felt that was enough to be able to utilize the title. But the problem is that I didn't need more connections in the field. So if I would have went to, say, Ohio State for the PhD, I'm going to be going and learning from teachers that make literally an eighth of what I make. And so for me, it was more of a ability to have a PD on the book and a PD when I went and interviewed for new contracts. It really didn't matter about YouTube or any of the other stuff, and it still doesn't. But the point is that it depends on what you're going to school for. If you're looking for school to actually get you a job, which I wasn't doing, then you're going to have a pedigree of people that are going to be able to help you in that scenario. So what I'm trying to get at is that if you're using your degree in order to enhance a job that you don't have, you're going to need to go to a school that has really good connections. So for me, getting my master's under Dr. Kramer and all of them helped me out tremendously because it got me on the speaking stage at the NSCA, which partially helped me getting my military contracts. So the point is that it depends on what you're trying to use your degree for. If you're enhancing your education or you're furthering and bettering your community, then it doesn't matter really where you get it. It matters only if you're using it to try to lever another job. I'm training to be a Navy doctor. With that, there is a weight requirement. I can't gain any more at 180, but want to continue strength training. Yeah, the best way to approach that is to watch your volume. And a lot of that's dietary. You know, watch your caloric intake. So find out what your lean mass is with a DEXA scan, or you can come to the gym at some point when you got time off and we'll do a bioprint. And then we can find out the exact amount of calories you need to eat to maintain weight. But what I'd also like to know is if you weigh 180, what's your body fat? Because if you're 180 with, say, 16% body fat, you have a little bit more room to put on muscle than if you're 180 and you're 6% body fat, right? Because you got no room to move. You're already about as lean as you're going to get. So you would want to only put hypertrophy volume in weak link muscle groups. You'd want to focus on central nervous system activation for most of your strength gains and not muscle mass. I just want to train. The money doesn't matter. Yeah, the problem is if you really want to train hard, you need money. Because if you need to eat big, you need to buy good equipment, you need to have all the right shit, that all takes money. And you know, I read something yesterday, and I don't have the words exactly down to the science, but one of the big things I read was you can have all of the popularity in the world. If it's not making you any money, you're not going to be able to sustain any type of a lifestyle or a business. So, for instance, like YouTube, I got about 113,000 subscribers. You know, I make around $800 a month off that YouTube channel, which doesn't even really pay for my time. But my Patreon has 1,200 members, and that does really well. And so what I try to find is, out of the 100,000 people that I have on my social media stuff, if you include Instagram, you know, which I don't put a lot of time and effort into, but if I have 27,000 on my normal page, 20,000 on my business page, so there's 50, and then I have 112 on my YouTube, That's about 165,000 people. And then my Facebook has a lot of too. I think maybe 16 or 18,000. The point is, I'm reaching roughly 200,000 people combined, and it only allots me about 1,200. But it's good because I make a lot of money, and those people really want my help, and they feel like my information is valuable to them. That's what you want to do. But look, it's about a 1% transfer. And that's where I think it's interesting, because a lot of people, they put all their eggs in one basket, and then they end up having all this popularity, but they're not really making any monetary gain on it, you know? So keeping a gym open, having new bars, experimenting with new things, all of that increases your strength and your, you're about 17% body fat. You still have some room to make progress at the same body weight. That's good. Training athletes is, and again, Igor, I'm not trying to shoot down your dreams, because I think that's awesome. But I think that it's a very slippery road. I've probably put 10 or 12 guys, or helped them get in the NFL, either through combine training or off-season training, guys at the Raiders, Packers, etc., Panthers, and even some at the Bears, maybe about 10 or 12 years ago. But the point is like, that stuff is really short-lived, and most of those coaches don't make great money. It's very interesting to find out how much some of those coaches actually make, and that's the top of the field, you know? Like, for instance, my good friend that's the head strength coach at the Cleveland Cavs that I go up and do assessment work for. They don't make what you think, and that guy is the head strength coach at a pro team. You know, and colleges, I think, are going to get really screwed up with this NIL, because now college isn't about development anymore. We're not developing education. We're not even really developing strength conditioning, because the kids aren't lasting in the schools long enough. So, you know, if you got a kind of a diamond in the rough as a freshman, and then they have a really standout year as a sophomore, they're going to go into the draft, or they're going to go into the portal and go to a different team and make more money. And so, as a strength coach, and I think as we all know, if you really want to get as good as you can, and let's say you're 18, it's a 4-year bite, meaning that you're not going to see any real badass progress unless you're some super genetic freak in at least 4 years. You guys have to remember, like, I started lifting at 12 and a half. I started competing at 13, and I didn't break my first world record until I was 28. That's 15 years of work with very little time off in order to achieve that goal, which I love, and I'm glad I did that, because I wanted to see what I was personally capable of. That was 15 years. And I'm not so sure that you want to get into a field like what I'm in that is based on like what you think is your passion and hobby, because what you'll find out is that there's a lot of people that it's not their passion and their hobby. It's the first thing they'll cut. It's, you know, it's like with the fire departments and the other contracts, like if levies don't pass and taxpayers don't want to pay more taxes for those guys to have these types of things, it's like they don't have to really give me any notice. So you recommend strength training first or muscle hypertrophy? Well, your first 6 months of training are going to be mostly neurological and progression. So what I would worry about the first 6 months is strength training with perfect form, technical ability. Don't worry about hypertrophy, because if you're worried about hypertrophy, you're probably going to be utilizing a lot of higher repetitions with possibly terrible form, which is going to make a motor pattern really hard to break in the future. So the first 6 months is technical capacity. So something to keep in mind, especially as a beginner. And I think the video I'm going to drop here in a little bit may help you with that as well, which is mostly designed for people that are just trying to gain hypertrophy. But there's a lot of really good information in this new video I'm going to drop here in a minute. Yeah, no problem, Mike Sheldon. No problem, buddy. Just try to... I only got 8 likes on this video, so if you guys got 17 people watching, so if you guys can all like this and help, that would be great. Yep, number 9, that's good. Well, I think that's a pretty good live for today. I appreciate you guys asking questions. I appreciate you guys liking. That's awesome. Yeah, no problem. Like I said, get on the YouTube channel here in a couple of hours. I'm going to drop a new video. It's going to be based on hypertrophy, but it might have some tricks that you can utilize. Even if you're trying to be really strong, there's some tricks you can utilize in that video that are there. So you guys are more than welcome to be on this. I appreciate all of the respectful comments and questions. And hopefully we've blocked a lot of the fucking shitheads, so we can just get to where we're just having fun with this shit. Talk to you guys later.